Hi, Odyssey Camper here with part one of a two-part video. Sorry about the mess in the van. I'm working on some things and have things in pieces. But this week I wanted to talk about refrigeration in your van. And I normally travel without refrigeration. Occasionally I'll bring cold drinks with me or something, but I try to cook with dehydrated foods and hot water, and I've covered that in the past, so I won't talk about it here. But someone asked me a very good question, which was, if you're diabetic and you have to keep your insulin cool, how do you do that in the vehicle? How do you do that long term and when you're parked out in the middle of nowhere? So I have two solutions to that problem. The first one I'll cover in this video, and it is an ice maker. This is a portable ice maker. It's an Igloo brand. I'll cover it more in detail in a minute. But it can be run off of a small inverter. I've got my 300 watt Bestech full sine inverter here running it. Doesn't have to be full sine, but that's what I have available. And I can make ice indefinitely in my vehicle as long as I have gasoline in the tank and as long as I have access to water. So I can make an unlimited amount of ice and simply put it in my cooler. I like these Coleman Coolers. They're inexpensive. They seal nice when you close the handle. You can wrap a towel around them and they'll keep things good and cold. Now, insulin doesn't really have to be kept cold. It's got a preservative in it, and as long as you keep it under 80 degrees, it'll last 28 days. However, if it's in a vehicle, the vehicle's easily going to get over that temperature and ruin the insulin, so you have to keep it cooler. In the case of a cooler with ice in it, I would put a thin blanket between the ice in your food and the insulin, just so it doesn't get down to 35 or so, and that'll keep it indefinitely in the car. It'll be much cooler in there than it will be just sitting out in the open. So with the ice maker and some water, you can go out on the road indefinitely and keep your insulin supply, even 2 months supply, as long as you want. This is also a good trick if there's a power outage, especially if you're coming to the end of your insulin supply and you've only got a couple days left in the 28 days and you want to make sure that it lasts. You can pop it in a cooler. If you have a power outage, instead of losing all the food in your refrigerator, you can just make some ice using a small inverter in your vehicle and then fill the cooler up. The other solution I have for part two of the video is sitting behind there, and that's a refrigerated cooler. Got this really cool refrigerated cooler that I've been using for a while, so I'll cover that further. For now, let's go into the kitchen and take a look at this. I'm going to shoot the rest of this video inside because my driveway is kind of noisy and it's pretty hot outside, which won't affect the ice maker, but it will affect me, so I'll do it inside. The brand I chose for my ice maker is the Igloo brand, but if you go on Amazon, you'll see a bunch of different brands on there. You'll see RCA is one of them, although I suspect they just licensed the name. It's not Radio Corporation of America, the old RCA. They're all Chinese made. Make sure you get the ones that are around $100, $120 because they have an actual compressor inside of them. And if I go down to the side of this, you can see the condenser unit inside, the coils, and you can see the fan. The cheaper units are Peltier, I think is how you pronounce it, units. They do make things cold, but they don't do a very good job of making ice. So make sure you get the decent one. Expect to spend between $99 and $120 for one. Come in different colors. So how these things work, it's basically a little refrigerator. And if I look inside, I can see these metal pieces, which are actually connected to the evaporator coil. That's the part that gets cold in your refrigerator, and normally you'd blow air across it to create refrigeration. What this does is it puts a little pool of water. There's a little tray that goes underneath there and surrounds those coils with water, and that freezes the water very quick. Probably within about 10 to 12 minutes you'll have your first set of ice cubes. Each one of those small metal rods will have an ice cube on it, and then the ice cube's delivered down into this tray inside. Underneath the tray is the water reservoir, so that's where we pour water. So what I'm going to do is turn this on and show you how the mechanism moves. First thing I need to do is add water. For this, you're going to want to use some spring water, or I got water out of my RO to do this. You don't want to use anything that's high in mineral content out of the tap or whatever, because it'll eventually accumulate on the evaporator. So now that I have that full, I can stick my tray back in. This is going to catch all the ice. And I guess I should mention that down in the bottom, that screen is where the water gets sucked in to make the ice cubes. And there's also a plug in the bottom so you can drain this out. So put the tray in. Comes with a scoop. You can choose to leave that in or not. And I'm going to turn it on. You have a couple of selections here. You can turn on the power. It'll tell you when the ice is full or when you need to add water, and you can pick small cubes or large cubes. Small cubes are quick and they're pretty good for drinks. We're talking about filling up a cooler, so we're going to want to use the large cubes. So when I turn this on, open the door and turn it on, that'll fire up the compressor, and you'll see it go through a clearing motion. This is what will happen when it scrapes the ice off. It'll pick the cubes up and dump them into the tray. Now right now a small water tray is moved in place, which I'm not going to be able to get the camera down to. And that's filling up with water right now. I'll hold the camera there just in case you can see it. You can probably see the glistening of the water. And it's going to hold water against those coils. So you can hear the pump running right now, and that's filling the tray with water. A little bit's flowing over the top, and that flows back into the bottom. Now, as those coils become cooler, the pump will shut off and the ice will freeze inside. When it's done, the tray will dump the ice, and this little scooper will pick it up and throw it into the container below. So I'm going to let that run. Let's look at the clock and see what time it is. It is 1:33. So let's see how long it takes to get the first batch of ice out of here. So while the ice maker's running, I'm going to take a look at the power consumption. I've got my handy dandy kilowatt here, and it says that with the compressor running it pulls about 100 watts. So we'll do the calculations on that and see how much current it's going to pull out of your battery if you were running this inside of your vehicle. Looks like we've got some ice. See the little ice cubes on top? Cracks them off, drops them inside. That little scooper should come through. Pick it up and throw it into the tray. There's our first batch, and it took, what did I say, it's 1:33 when we started, so it took 8 minutes. So it took 8 minutes. So our first batch of ice, small as it is, took 8 minutes. So now I'll see how much ice we can make in an hour. It's 1:41, got a few cubes in there, and we'll see how much ice we can make. Now about these few cubes, that's a small amount of ice. However, if you stopped at a rest area or something, fired this up and created a batch of ice, you toss that in on top, and that's more ice than you had. But really, this works best when you can park for an hour or so and run the machine, or if you're at your campsite at night, stick it out on a picnic table, run it for a couple hours and make enough ice. But if you needed some on the go and you're looking to keep food or insulin cold, then that's a good start for 8 minutes of time. All right, let's see how much ice we can make in an hour. And about the calculations, so 107 watts, that's roughly, we're up to 109, so we're talking about 9 amps of current at 12 volts. And so your typical van battery has about a 44 amp hour capacity. You don't want to run it down more than, let's say, 50%, so 44, so that'd be 22 amp hours. And you've got roughly 10 amps there, so you wouldn't want to run it for more than 2 hours and 15 minutes without starting the car. But the nice thing is, if you start your car, it'll quickly recharge the battery and you can run it some more. So doing that, carrying some water with you, you can create ice indefinitely. So no matter how far out in the desert you are or how long you're on the road, you don't have to worry about trying to find ice at a convenience store or something. If you've got something that really needs to be kept cold, like insulin, then this is a good method for keeping it cold. So I'm going to run this for an hour, as I mentioned, and we'll see how much ice we can make in an hour. But parking at a rest area, 10 minutes, that's a reasonable stop. You can make a decent scoop of ice. So approximately 1 hour later, getting the last batch of cubes out of there. Show you the clock just so you know what time it is. Alright, so pretty close, within a minute of an hour. Let's see how much ice we have here. Just think that's the coolest thing. Love watching it. Alright, so this is how much ice we got after an hour. Now, it's worth mentioning that some of the ice is melted, and the reason is there is no refrigeration inside this part of the unit. So it's really intended that you get the ice out immediately after it forms and put it in your cooler. You don't have to, it'll just melt down into the tray, but I would have a lot more ice here if I had put it in the cooler. So what I'm going to do is finish up with a 2-hour test. I'll let this thing run for another hour. I'll put this ice in the cooler so it doesn't melt, and then we'll see how much we end up with in the end. 2-hour mark, let's see how much ice we made. A fair amount. These 2 bowls are filled up, and that should be enough to fill up a small cooler with enough ice to keep things cold for a day. And that's in 2 hours. So if you're parked at your campsite, you can run this ice machine either off of the campground power or off of an inverter in your car. It only uses 100 watts. And you can create ice to replenish your cooler. So every night you can generate some more ice. This is also good if you have a power outage and you need to take things out of your freezer or refrigerator. You can just put them in the cooler, and using the inverter in your car, you could run the ice machine indefinitely. There's a lot of gas in your car. So that'll keep your food from going bad also. And I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this would be good if you're diabetic and you need to keep insulin cold. Well, most insulin has a preservative in it now, and it'll keep for 28 days in room temperature. So really what we're trying to do is if we store insulin in the car, we're trying to keep it room temperature or cooler. We don't need to freeze it or anything, or even store it in the 30s. So what I would do is I would put this ice in the cooler with your other food and whatnot, and then put a towel or something on top of it and your insulin on top of that. And that'll keep it from freezing or getting too cold. You can store insulin long term for between, I think it's 36 and 46 degrees. You don't want to get any colder than 36, or you could freeze it. And that'll keep it stored for a lot longer period. But we're really talking about if you want to go out and camp for a week or something and you're worried about it getting hot in the car, this is one method you can use. $100 for the ice maker, assuming you already have an inverter in your car and you're good to go. Using this setup, you can go out on the road indefinitely. As long as you have water and your inverter with you, you can run the vehicle and you can generate ice, keep your food cold as long as you want, and only cost you $100. Now, someone might say, well, $100 is an awful lot for ice. Well, here a bag of ice, which admittedly is more than this, more ice than this, but a bag of ice is like $4.50. And so how many weeks would it take before this paid itself back? If you're a full-timer, it would pay itself back pretty quick. The other thing is you can bring it home and you can use it at parties to make ice. It's not just for camping. So that concludes part 1 of refrigeration in the minivan camper and keeping insulin cold. The next video is going to deal with a larger solution, a little more expensive solution for refrigeration in your vehicle. Until then, this is Odyssey Camper signing off.